Alright, welcome back to episode 6 of the series Start With One. This is a series where you're going to learn how to make a website and do web development with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript from the very beginning. So I don't require that you learn anything before. This should teach you all the things that you need to know about marking up your text with HTML and then styling it with CSS, and then adding some movement and changing that style on the fly dynamically through JavaScript. And so right now we're still learning the building blocks, and in this video we're going to go through some special styling that you're probably going to run into with HTML. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and just copy the paragraph, and so we'll get a fresh paragraph to start with up here. So let me just save that, and you can see it reflected. So we're going to mark up this paragraph. And the special styling that we're going to go over today, the first one is called emphasis. So emphasis, both of these things that we're going to cover are about making the text stand out. Now, a long time ago, we would use things like an I tag for italics or a B tag for bold, and we don't use those anymore because we do a lot of our just when you want something to visually look different, like an italic or a bold, we actually use CSS for that these days. We don't mark up our styling in the HTML, so what I show you today is going to look like we're marking up the style and the way that it looks, but the reality is we're actually letting screen readers, we're letting bots who are coming to the page know this is an actual, this part of the text should be emphasized. So this is actually more important, or it's a more important part of this entire text. So the first thing that we do, we're going to use a tag called emphasis. So the way we write that is with an EM. So when it's in the HTML, EM means emphasis, or to emphasize, and then we need to close that out. So remember, we had an opening and closing tag here. Well, this is one of those that opens and closes. So whatever is in between is going to be emphasized. And then when I save that and we look over here, we can see that own is italic now. So what emphasis does is that it makes it italic. Now, one of the other things that it does, if this is a screen reader reading this, it reads it like a person would. So if you were reading this out loud, you would say, so she was considering in her own mind. You would put the emphasis there because that's what it means, at least in English, when you italicize something. But a screen reader is also going to do that. It's going to change its tone of voice when it gets to this, so that the person who's listening as the page is being read is actually going to hear that you put emphasis there. And then any bots who come along are going to see that, and they're going to know that this word means something special. So maybe it's I don't know, maybe it's a word in another language. Like a lot of times if you see Latin, the Latin will be in italics or something like that. So if you want that to actually be emphasized, then you would put the EM. If you only want it to be italicized, I'll show you, the tag that we use that in just a moment. And the other one that we use is called strong. So strong, strong, and we also need to close that one with the closing tag. So this word suddenly is going to take on a strong meaning. So we want the user to know, we want this to sort of pop off the page. And the way that it does that, if we save and refresh, is that you can see it gets a bold treatment visually. But whenever a screen reader comes through here, it's actually going to say this with a different tone. So when suddenly, a white rabbit with pink eyes, so it's going to give that word a different sort of tone and feel when it's read out loud. And also when a Google bot or some sort of indexing robot comes through your page and indexes all this text, it's going to take a note that this word is more important, because you're putting it inside of those strong, in that strong text. Now, if you don't want the word to be particularly pointed out, you just wanted some bold text or you wanted some italic text, and you don't really care, you don't want to point it out as something special, then we use what's called a span tag. Now, this is a pretty all-purpose tag. And a span tag has these have semantic meaning, so they mean this is important, you should read it differently. This stands out, you should read it differently. But a span doesn't mean anything. It's just a way of wrapping a piece of text or wrapping an image or whatever it is, so that you can hook in and use CSS with that. So I was telling you before that we used to use things like an I to denote italics. So if we look over here, pleasure is italicized, so is own. So we're using two different tags, but we're getting the same visual markup. Now this one has there's nothing here except the italic word. This one here is going to be read stronger with emphasis. This one is just going to be whether the pleasure of making a daisy chain. So no one's going to read that any different. I mean, you might read it differently if you're reading it. But we would use italics for things like words in a foreign language. Oh gosh, why else would you use italics? Foreign words or technical terms or some sort of, you had a thought or something like that. So this is purely visual. And the way that we do that these days is we mark it with a span, and then we'll add a CSS class. Maybe you call it italic, or maybe you call it something that has more to do with whatever this word is, like a foreign language word or something like that. But you would use that CSS class in order to mark this word as italic, because you don't really want to give it special emphasis. You want it to be superficially or visually italic. The same thing, we used to use the B for bold, and we would close that off, and then you can see that this bold is exactly the same visually as this one, but this one is just for you to see that it's bold. This one will actually be read differently. Now these are not, it is not suggested that you use these tags anymore. They're not deprecated, obviously they work, but today oftentimes we use I for an icon. So this will be some sort of font icon in between the I tags. So that could get a little weird, a little confusing. You might get some styling that you didn't want if you're marking things with the I tag. So I would say if you want just purely aesthetic, visual italics or bold, that we do it through the CSS. Now you're not going to be able to do that if you're following through this course for a little bit, because it's going to be a while before we get to the CSS, but not too long. We're making our way through the HTML building blocks, but this is the way that we do it. So we just sort of put a container around it, and then we mark that container through the CSS with the styles that we want. One of the reasons this is a bad idea is for the reason that we created CSS, or someone created it, so that if you think about it, if you had a website of 100 pages and you had all of your styling in the HTML, there's no way for you to go through and just make a change and then it changes everything. You actually have to go through every instance of every page where there's an HTML tag and make those changes. It was a huge pain in the neck, and so they created CSS in order to, so if I had italic here, I can put that italic class all over the place, and then all I have to do is change one part of the CSS, and that changes every single instance where there's an italic. And it's harder to do that with all of these tags unless you only use those tags for specific things. But we only have so many tags that we can use. So if we mark them with CSS, we can sort of change their use. So we can use a bunch of spans, but if we change span in the CSS, it's going to change all of those spans the exact same way. But if we use a class on every different span, then we can sort of vary the changes that we make even though we're using one HTML element. So I think that'll make more sense as we get into the CSS. But just know that this is generally not a good idea. If you have a tiny website with one page or something, it's probably not a big deal. But if you have a larger page, it's just a good habit to get into, to use your spans to do your styling, just purely visual styling. Now if you want it to be strongly emphasized, then you would use strong or emphasis, whether you wanted to display as a bold or whether you want it to display only as an italic. And you can put this strong inside of this emphasis so that it gets bold and italic at the same time, and then it's like a double emphasis. So that is possible. Alright, if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments section below, and I'll be happy to get to them. If there's some contradictory evidence somewhere, please fill me in. I'm mostly rolling through some of what I know, and some of it is research I'm doing too, but these are sort of building blocks for HTML that I use every day. So this is not stuff that I don't understand or don't know, but showing you just sort of the shift from how it used to be to what we do today, and then why are we using these things as opposed to these other things. So if you see things like this in old code, or code from someone maybe who doesn't understand how things have shifted, then you'll understand, okay, this is supposed to be just a purely visual sort of thing because they're using the bold. Okay, and the language is always changing, so just know that whatever you learn today is going to be changing into the future, so just sort of be prepared for those changes to come along the way. Alright, and if you've missed any previous episodes, go back to click the link in the playlist, or in the description. It'll take you to the playlist of videos. This is episode 6, so there's 5 episodes before, and we'll just continue rolling along for as long as we can. The idea is we're going to do these building blocks for the HTML, and then we're going to start to put some sort of structure together for the web page and show you how to structure the web page, and then use these elements inside that structure. And then in the end, we're going to wind up with a profile page. So it'd be similar to sort of what we're building over here, which is, there'd be a profile photo of you and your name and any information that you want to include about yourself, thinking sort of like a resume or whatever you want to share about yourself. Maybe it's a personal profile, but essentially you control the profile. You control what information goes on it, how it looks, how it's presented, and then also where to put it online so that you're not stuck, having to do whatever Facebook wants you to do, or Twitter or Instagram or whatever, Google, whoever has a profile of information for you. You can sort of you don't have to send people only to that. You can send them to something that is a little bit more of what you want to present about yourself, and not just the data itself. So that's the idea, and thanks for sticking with me so far, and I hope that this is a good learning experience for you to sort of go from zero and starting with the very first step of web development. Alright, stay tuned for other episodes. As I can release them, I will put them out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.